This is the March 19th, 2012 interview with Ruth Hawley. She's the daughter of Stella Lynch, Stella Stage Lynch. And in this interview, she's going to talk, in this first series of interviews, she's going to talk about her memories of her mother. And first, I'd like you to talk about how your mother and your father met. You said earlier that they met, they first saw each other at church, and they exchanged glances, and then she broke off her engagement. It's on. Mom, it's on.
Oh. Oh.
It's on. We are filming.
I itch.
Okay. That's okay. A little bit of humor can be added to the interviews.
Okay, I don't mind.
So anyway, in the last interview, you talked about how they had first seen each other at church. He was a traveling salesman, and they exchanged glances, and then she went home and broke her engagement with a local farm boy. Okay.
Even an older man.
Okay. So when did they meet for the first time after that?
Well, that was on Sunday. Well, Monday morning, she'd stirred around, cleaned up the house, and had things proper, because she just knew he was coming out. And he arrived and she'd talk to her parents to behave themselves, not drink coffee out of their saucers, and to treat him as a prospective friend. And she knew how to work the system. So anyway, my father arrived right early that morning and they bought rods. They had hired him, so he was there that first day as a salesman, and she had one thing my grandmother did teach my mother to cook. She was a good cook. That was one thing that was, even though she was lazy as her father was, she could, if it was absolutely imperative, she could have shoulder to the wheel and produce. Well, she had this nice dinner arranged, and he came in. He'd had a break. I guess he had one of the local boys do the work, because I can't imagine my father climbing a building. But I can't tell you about that part of it. But he came in and had lunch, and Bruce was tittering back in the kitchen, because guess what? She scolded her father and Bruce not to drink coffee out of their saucers. And the first thing my father did to put everybody to their ease, he pours coffee in his saucer and drinks out of it. And Bruce about had a spasm, laughing. And he goes out in the kitchen, and he doubled over with laughter. And my mother walks out there, and Bruce says, "Now what do you think of your city slicker?" And he drank out of his saucer just to put them at their ease, because that was something I never in my life ever saw my father ever do, was drink coffee out of a saucer. But he did that particular day because it was a custom, I guess, for the farm people to do that. So anyway, he came out. I guess that first deal was to sell the rods, because he came one more time to put the rods up. I'm not too sure about that, but maybe that was all the way I told it, the way it was in the beginning, because he came one more time, and by that second meeting, he proposed marriage. And so I guess maybe the way I told it was right in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
And then he came out as a boyfriend one more time. Well, the next time was when they got married. So actually he saw her 3 times before they got married. But you didn't let opportunity slide through your fingers. In those days, you had no way of getting around or meeting people. So she was only too happy. She was then 20 years old, and they realized she was needed a husband if she was going to leave home. So he came out and he brought a box of candy to her, and they had this one date. And
on the farm.
Then the next time they met was when he came to marry her, and that was in the winter time. And then they were married there in that parlor where I visited. That's where Warren and his family were took over this house, the same house that my mother was married at. They had built on a new part of the house. Bruce had when he and Francis.
Okay. And so after they got married, then what did they do?
Well, they had a horse and buggy that they went up to the local town. They had a room at the hotel there. That's where they spent their wedding night.
In Laurel?
Not in Laurel, but they waved goodbye to their parents the way they went in this horse and buggy. And I can't remember the name of the town. Next, it might have been Belden. But it seems to me there was a closer place than that. They stayed at the hotel there. And I can't remember the little town, but that was where they spent the wedding night. Well, then they caught the train into Lincoln, and the Lynch family were very well known, and they were feted by the store people there in Lincoln. They had the wedding couple go down the street of O Street, some sort of a parade that was an impromptu sort of thing, and the store managers came out, and there was quite a crowd at their chivalry. It took the place of a chivalry. It was right on the main street.
Didn't your father tease his family by sending a telegram telling them he's marrying a stage girl, and they thought that they thought he was marrying a showgirl?
Yeah, he was marrying a stage girl. They didn't know what to do. And in the meantime, he was engaged, but he'd broken off between the interview when he drank the coffee out of the saucer and went back to get married. He had a lady friend by the name of Nellie Bly, and she belonged to the same Eastern Star chapter that I attended when I lived there in University Place, and she never married. But Nellie Bly, and he had given her a diamond ring, and she gave the ring back when he asked for it, and that's what the ring he brought to my mother was one that had been on the finger of Nellie Bly.
Okay, so after they got married, then they moved to Lincoln.
Well, they lived in Lincoln there was a big old house there. They had their first home in Lincoln, but not for very long. Then they moved to Omaha, and he was a salesman, and he bought and sold property. He had 7 pieces of property in Omaha at one time, rentals, and he also owned this building that Mrs. B, that was the big time operator there in Omaha. He owned their original building that she bought and had that big furniture operation going on, Mrs. B, and that's been a very prominent family. She was a Czechoslovakian or some older, but Mrs. B was still in business when her dad and I moved to Omaha, and I was in the store there.
Okay.
And that was the one that was eventually, when this second terrible tornado hit, and that store was taken out with the tornado. There wasn't a scrap of nothing left.
Okay. Well, let's go back. Let's not jump ahead too quickly here. So they got married. They moved to Omaha.
Then they moved to Omaha.
And
he was in the automobile agency business. And he had a big office there on Farnham. And he had quite a crew working for him. but there was a bit too much horseplay. He had a funny bone, and he had automobiles brought in from Detroit, and he had the Patterson was one of them, and he had stock in those other companies at the same time. He could have bought Ford stock, and he picked the wrong stock, or he'd have been really a rich man.
Uh-huh.
But
and when was Uncle Russell born?
Well, let's see, about 1917.
When did they get married?
I suppose 1915.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Something there. Russell was born several years after.
Okay. And they were living in Omaha still.
Yeah, they were living in Omaha. Both us kids were born in Omaha.
Mm-hmm.
Because I came 3.5 years after Russell.
Okay.
And I was born in 1920.
Okay. And do you think Grandma Stella, do you think your mom felt lonely or missed being on the farm, or she was happy to be in the big city?
She was a social butterfly. She liked company, and she was a very childlike in her wants. She was not the temperament of my grandparents at all. Well, of course, they raised her as a delicate flower.
Mm-hmm.
She wasn't allowed, like I said, to go even step foot in the barn or anything like that. My grandfather had set rules. She could collect eggs out in the chicken coop. That was all right, but not to go near the farm where the animals were doing things.
So was she a good housewife then?
Oh yes, she was a good housewife.
So she knew all about inside the house, just not the farming side of
She was
things.
taught to work. My grandmother saw to it she learned how to cook and to sew, and she had plenty of smarts. There was nothing wrong with
so it was just a division of labor.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay.
And she was spoiled. Like she went with Harry and Orabelle when they went to town there in Pender, and she ate up all the candy. Poor Bruce didn't even get a piece of candy. Poor kid.
Okay. So she liked. Okay. Well, we're going to have to end this interview, but we're going to come right back to it with the next part.
Okay.